If someone had told me years ago that I'd be here, writing this post, spilling out my life like it's some sort of trashy novel, I would have laughed in their face. I was never the guy for drama, never the one who got sucked into messy situations. I thought I had it all under control, but life is a way of turning everything upside down when you least expect it. Let me back up for a second. I'm not the kind of guy to throw pity parties, but what I'm about to share, it's my truth. No sugarcoating, no skipping the uncomfortable details. You all deserve the whole picture. Maybe it'll help someone, maybe not. But it's helping me get my head straight, so here goes. I grew up in a typical small-town family. Dad worked long hours and Mom, well, she was always around, keeping everything together. We weren't rich, but we weren't scraping by either. My folks were the stay together no matter what type. They fought a lot, sure, but divorce? Nah, that wasn't even a word in their vocabulary. So, I grew up thinking marriage was forever. Once you signed on, that was it. You stayed loyal, worked through your problems, and didn't bail when things got tough. I guess that's where I got my warped sense of commitment. But the thing about growing up with parents like that is you start to develop these unrealistic expectations. I thought I could fix everything, that if I tried hard enough, any relationship could be saved. Hell, even my first marriage, I thought I could fix that too. Spoiler alert, I couldn't. My first wife and I were young. Too young, probably. We rushed into everything like idiots. Marriage, buying a house, planning for kids. But when reality hit, financial struggles, her realizing we weren't compatible anymore, it all went to hell. That was my first taste of betrayal. She left me for someone else, someone more exciting, I guess. And I was left cleaning up the mess. But I came out of it with this ironclad determination that the next time, it would be different. I wasn't going to fail again. And then I met her. Her name was, well, let's just call her Jessica for now. We met at a party, of all places. It wasn't supposed to be anything serious at first. I was still licking my wounds from the divorce, and she was this whirlwind of energy that just pulled me in. She had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. The kind of woman who made you forget all the bad shit that happened before. We started off slow. Our first date was nothing extravagant, just dinner at this little Italian place I used to go to. But it was the conversation that hooked me. She was sharp, witty, and man, could she hold her own. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the one I can build a life with. We both had our baggage, sure, but it felt like we could overcome anything together. It wasn't always easy. We had our rough patches like any couple. There was that time I lost my job, and we had to scrape by on our income alone. But we made it work. We were a team, or at least I thought we were. That's the thing about hindsight. You look back and realize how blind you were to all the warning signs. But before I get into all that, there's someone else I need to mention. My best friend. Let's call him Rob. Rob and I, we went way back. We'd known each other since high school, back when we both thought we were invincible, ready to take on the world. He was more than a friend. He was like a brother. We did everything together, sports, road trips, even a few wild nights out I'd rather not admit to. When I went through my first divorce, Rob was there, pulling me through the worst of it. I trusted him with everything. He was the first person I introduced Jessica to. The three of us even went on a couple of trips together. Just fun, no drama. I never once thought there could be any tension there. But now, looking back, I wonder if I missed something. Anyway, I thought I had it all figured out. We settled into this routine, planning for the future, talking about kids, vacations, buying a bigger house. The kind of stuff you think about when you're building a life together. We weren't rich by any means, but we were comfortable. I felt like I had finally made it after all the crap I'd been through. A stable home, a woman I loved, and a best friend who was like family. But family life, man, it can blind you. You get so caught up in the day-to-day that you don't see the cracks forming underneath. We'd spend Sundays binge-watching shows, planning our next vacation, talking about how many kids we wanted. I was naive enough to believe that stability meant everything was fine. But stability's a joke when the ground is already shifting beneath your feet. And yeah, I'm getting there. I know you're probably wondering when it all starts to go wrong. But that's the thing. At the beginning, it doesn't feel like anything is wrong. You don't see the betrayal coming because you don't want to. I certainly didn't. And with Rob, well, we were close enough that if something was off, I figured he'd tell me. He always had my back just like I had his. I never once thought that my best friend and my wife would, but I'm getting ahead of myself. There were small things, little details that in hindsight scream red flags, but at the time, I was too busy playing house to notice. For now, just know this. Things weren't as perfect as I made them out to be. You know how people say that when something's wrong, you can feel it? Like this instinct kicks in, and even if everything looks fine on the surface, there's this nagging feeling that something's off. That's what happened to me. And the worst part? It started slow, creeping up on me until I couldn't ignore it anymore. It wasn't anything huge at first. Just small stuff, little things that would have seemed normal if they didn't start piling up. Jessica, she started acting weird. I remember the first time I noticed something was different. She was always on her phone. Now, before this, we'd been the kind of couple who'd share everything. If one of us got a text, we'd laugh about it, or she'd show me funny stuff her friends sent her. But suddenly that changed. She became secretive. I'd see her tilt her phone away from me when I walked by, or she'd lock it when I sat down next to her. And yeah, maybe that sounds paranoid, but when you've been with someone for years, you notice when they start guarding their phone like it's the launch codes for a nuclear strike. Then came the late nights. She worked in marketing, so late nights weren't unheard of, but they became more frequent. She'd come home, smelling of perfume, one I didn't recognize. Her hair and makeup were done in a way she hadn't bothered with in years. I'd ask her how her day was, try to make conversation, but she was always too tired to talk. She'd brush me off with a vague smile and head to bed, leaving me alone in the living room with this growing pit in my stomach. I remember the night I finally snapped. She walked in at some ungodly hour, and I was sitting in the dark, waiting for her like some kind of cliché. "Where the hell have you been?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She rolled her eyes, like I was overreacting. "I told you I had a late meeting," she said, kicking off her heels and heading toward the bathroom. But I wasn't about to let it slide this time. A late meeting that ends at midnight? Come on, Jessica. What's really going on? She didn't even bother turning around. "Work is stressful right now. You know how it is. Can we not do this tonight?" That was her go-to line for everything. Work is stressful. And maybe I was overthinking it. But something in her tone, in the way she refused to look at me, it just didn't sit right. Then there was Rob. The guy had been my best friend for years. We'd been through everything together. And yet, out of nowhere, he started pulling back. No more weekend fishing trips, no more grabbing beers after work. He always had an excuse. Busy with work, family stuff, you name it. But the worst part, even when we did manage to hang out, he was off. Jumpy, like he was waiting for something to go wrong. And it wasn't just me who noticed. Our other friends started making comments, too, about how Rob seemed distant, distracted. I remember one night, after a few beers, one of the guys said, "What's up with Rob lately? He's been acting weird as hell." I laughed it off at the time, shrugging. Yeah, probably just work stuff. But deep down, I couldn't shake this feeling. Was something going on with him? Was he hiding something from me? For a while, I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, that I was being paranoid, reading too much into things. But as time went on, the signs became harder to ignore. Jessica started changing her phone password. And yeah, maybe couples don't need to share every little thing, but she'd never done that before. We used to trust each other completely. And now she acted like I wasn't even part of her life anymore. I tried talking to her, really I did. I sat her down one night after dinner and said, "Look, I know you've got a lot going on at work, but you've been acting distant lately. I just want to know if everything's okay." She didn't even pause to think. "I'm fine. It's just stress. You don't need to worry." But I wasn't fine. I was drowning in doubt, feeling like an outsider in my own marriage. Every time I tried to get her to open up, she'd throw the same lines at me. It's just work. I'm tired. Nothing's wrong. You're overthinking it. It wasn't just her words that bothered me. It was the way she said them. There was this flatness to her voice, like she was reading from a script. And yeah, I started checking her phone. I'm not proud of it, but what was I supposed to do? I had to know if I was going crazy or if something was actually going on. But the thing is, I never found anything. No suspicious texts, no incriminating photos. Just the same old work emails and boring group chats. And yet, the more I looked, the more I convinced myself that I was missing something. Then one night, she came home from another late meeting, and I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I asked her straight up, "Are you cheating on me?" She froze for a split second, just long enough for me to notice. But then she turned, gave me this exasperated look, and said, "Seriously? You're going to accuse me of that? After everything we've been through?" Her words stung, but the way she said it, it was too rehearsed, too perfect. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her so badly. But deep down, I knew. I knew she was lying. And Rob? Well, he'd been lying too. I wasn't just losing my wife. I was losing my best friend. But instead of confronting them both, I did what anyone else in my shoes would have done. I kept quiet. I watched. I waited. I tried to piece together the truth without letting on that I knew something was wrong. Every time Jessica went out, every time Rob made an excuse, I logged it away in my mind, building this invisible wall between us. Because when the truth finally came out, I was going to be ready. Deep down, I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to be wrong so badly. I clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, it was all in my head. But when the signs keep slapping you in the face, there's only so much you can ignore. It was the family dinner that pushed me over the edge. Jessica had always been big on family. Her parents, my parents, even the cousins. We had this dinner planned for weeks. It was supposed to be a simple Sunday gathering, nothing fancy. But that afternoon, she suddenly had a work emergency. And not just any emergency, one that meant she had to cancel the entire evening. No explanation beyond a vague, "I have to go. Something came up at work." That was the moment. The last straw. I called Rob, thinking maybe we could at least grab a beer, blow off some steam, but he didn't answer. Not once. I texted him, left a voicemail, even checked his social media. Silence. And that was it. Something was definitely up. The next morning, I made the call. I still remember how much my hands shook when I dialed the number for the private investigator. It felt like I was crossing a line, doing something I'd never be able to come back from. But at that point, I needed to know. I had to stop living in the uncertainty. The PI's name was Doug. Seemed like an ordinary guy, nothing flashy, which was exactly what I needed. We met at a coffee shop across town, where no one would recognize me. I laid everything out for him. My suspicions, the weird behavior, the constant excuses. Doug listened, didn't judge, just took notes like he'd heard it all before. I remember asking, "How long does this usually take, the investigation?" Doug looked up, pen still in his hand, and said, "Depends. Some cases are wrapped up in a few days. Others, well, it can take weeks. But trust me, if something's going on, we'll find it." That if was what I held on to. I told myself it could still all be in my head. I wasn't one to jump to conclusions, right? Maybe Jessica was just stressed. Maybe Rob really was busy. But deep down, I knew better. It didn't take long. Just 3 days later, Doug called me up. His voice was steady, like he was delivering bad news to someone for the 100th time. "I think you're going to want to see this," he said. We met again, same place. Doug slid a manila envelope across the table. I stared at it for a second, my stomach twisting in knots. I wasn't ready to open it, but I knew I had to. Inside were photos. Crystal clear, high-res shots of Jessica and Rob together. And not just together, but together. Hand in hand at a restaurant. Walking into a hotel. Her laughing, leaning into him like she used to do with me. I felt sick. Physically sick. It wasn't just the photos either. Doug had gone all out. Texts between them, screenshots of their conversations, even a video clip from a hotel security camera. There they were, walking arm in arm, disappearing behind a door. I couldn't breathe. I didn't want to believe it, even with the evidence right in front of me. But there was undeniable proof. Jessica, the woman I'd built my life with, and Rob, the guy I'd trusted like a brother. They'd both betrayed me in the worst possible way. I sat there in silence for what felt like hours, just staring at the evidence. Doug didn't say much, just gave me space. Finally, I managed to choke out, "How long?" He shrugged. "Best I can tell, a few months, maybe longer." Months. They'd been sneaking around behind my back for months. I wanted to smash something, scream, drive to wherever the hell they were and confront them right then and there. But I didn't. Instead, I thanked Doug, stuffed the envelope back into my bag, and left the coffee shop in a daze. On the drive home, the rage started to bubble up. It wasn't just Jessica. Though what she'd done cut deep, it was Rob. My best friend. My brother in arms. The guy I'd trusted more than anyone. And he'd done this to me? Stabbed me in the back, and thought I'd never find out? No. He wasn't going to get away with this. Neither of them was. That's when the plan started forming. I wasn't going to confront them in some emotional outburst. No, I was going to be smarter than that. I was going to hit them where it hurt the most. For Jessica, that was our marriage. For Rob, it was his reputation. Rob worked for a well-known company, the kind of place where image was everything. He was always bragging about his spotless career, how he was up for a promotion, how he was the golden boy. That's where I'd hit him. Right in the career he valued so much. The first step was gathering more evidence. I already had plenty from Doug, but I needed more, something that would leave no room for doubt. I had Doug follow them for another week, collecting as much dirt as he could. It wasn't hard. Jessica and Rob were careless, thinking they'd never be caught. More dinners, more hotels, even a weekend getaway. They didn't hide it. Once I had everything, I started laying the groundwork. Rob's company had strict policies about personal conduct, especially when it came to affairs that could damage the company's reputation. I knew that if I played my cards right, I could destroy his entire career with just a few well-placed pieces of information. I drafted an anonymous email to the HR department, attaching some of the juiciest bits of evidence. Photos of Rob and Jessica together, screenshots of their messages, and a note explaining that Rob's affair could harm the company's image. I made sure to mention that he was up for a promotion, just to twist the knife a little deeper. I didn't send it right away, though. No. Ibaita. I wanted to watch them sweat. Every time Jessica came home late or canceled plans, I smiled to myself, knowing what was coming. She had no idea what was brewing just beneath the surface. And Rob hadn't called me in weeks. I figured he was too busy screwing my wife to bother checking in on his so-called best friend. Finally, after what felt like forever, I sent the email. I didn't feel guilty. Not one bit. They deserved every bit of what was coming their way. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. Revenge isn't something you rush. If you want to do it right, you need patience. Cold, calculated patience. I wasn't about to let my emotions get the better of me. Not after everything Jessica and Rob had done. No, this had to be perfect, and it had to hit them where it hurt the most. After sending that email to Rob's HR department, I didn't just sit back and wait. I kept collecting more evidence, making sure every move I made was airtight. Doug kept following them, and each new piece of dirt he brought me felt like another nail in the coffin. I knew every step they took, every time they met up. It was almost like they didn't care if they got caught. They were that cocky. The more I watched, the more obvious it became. Rob wasn't just meeting Jessica at hotels anymore. They'd started getting more reckless, going out in public like they were just another happy couple. I kept track of their movements, analyzing patterns. I knew when they met for lunch, where they went for drinks after work, and even when they snuck off for a weekend business trip. But the real goldmine was social media. They thought they were being clever, posting vague photos of sunsets, dinners, and hotel rooms, but anyone paying attention could put two and two together. Rob would post a picture of a work event with a glass of wine, and an hour later, Jessica would post the same damn thing from the same place. They might as well have been waving a neon sign that said, "We're screwing around." I saved everything. Screenshots, timestamps, comments. It was all part of the plan. Rob's carefully curated image of the perfect family man was about to come crashing down, and I was going to be the one holding the wrecking ball. See, Rob wasn't just some guy at work. He had ambitions, big ones. He loved to talk about how he was in line for a major promotion, how he was the golden boy at the office, the one everyone looked up to. But that image? It was built on a foundation of lies. He'd made himself out to be the perfect husband, the dedicated father, the guy who always put his family first. And at work, that reputation had paid off. He was well-liked, respected, but no one knew the truth. No one but me. And that's where I was going to strike. His career was his weak spot, the thing he valued more than anything else. And I was going to tear it apart. But before I dropped the bomb at work, I needed to prime the rest of our social circle. The truth was too big to just drop all at once. I had to let it trickle out slowly, plant the seeds of doubt before dropping the hammer. So, I started talking to our mutual friends, casually of course, nothing too obvious. At first, it was little comments here and there. "Hey, have you noticed Rob's been acting kind of weird lately?" Or, "I haven't seen much of Jessica lately. She's been working late a lot." I didn't outright accuse them of anything, just hinted that something might be off. People love gossip, especially when they think they're in on a secret. I knew once the suspicions were out there, it wouldn't take much for them to start talking. And they did. It didn't take long for the whispers to start making their way back to me. People started asking questions, and I played the role of the concerned husband perfectly. "Yeah, things have been tough lately. I don't know what's going on with Jessica, but we're working through it," I'd say, keeping my voice low, as if I was sharing something private. It was all part of the setup. I wasn't just targeting Rob's work life. I wanted to fracture his relationships with everyone. Friends, colleagues, even his family. The more isolated he became, the harder the fall would hit. He'd always been the guy who had it all together, the one everyone looked up to. By the time I was done, no one would trust him anymore. Meanwhile, I kept tabs on Rob's work situation. The HR department had received my anonymous email, but they hadn't acted on it yet. I knew it would take time for them to investigate, but I wasn't in a hurry. I wanted them to dig into Rob's life, to see the cracks for themselves. In the meantime, I made sure to keep collecting more dirt. I even managed to talk to Rob's wife, which was a whole different kind of satisfying. She had no idea, of course. She still thought her husband was the perfect family man. I didn't say much, just asked how things were going with Rob, how their kids were doing. She gushed about him like he was some kind of saint, telling me how lucky she was to have him. I could barely keep a straight face. It was hard not to feel a little guilty sometimes, especially when I saw how much she adored him. But then I'd remind myself of the photos, the messages, the way he'd betrayed me without a second thought. That guilt evaporated real quick. As the weeks went on, the tension built. Rob and Jessica were still carrying on like they had nothing to worry about, but the walls were closing in. People started to notice the weirdness between us. Mutual friends would ask me what was going on, why Rob and I weren't hanging out like we used to. I'd shrug and say something vague like, "People change, I guess." But I could see the curiosity growing in their eyes. They wanted to know more, and soon enough, they'd get the full story. Finally, after weeks of planning, it was time to start the real takedown. The thing about revenge is it's not just about hitting back. It's about timing. You need to strike when it'll hurt the most, when the impact will be felt by everyone involved. That's what I had in mind when I planned the event. It wasn't enough for Jessica and Rob to feel my wrath privately. They needed to be exposed for who they really were in front of everyone they cared about. It took weeks of planning. I rented out this swanky venue, one of those places people use for corporate events or milestone celebrations. It had to look professional, like this was some grand, innocent occasion. I sent out the invites, making sure to include all the key players, our mutual friends, colleagues, even a few of Rob's higher-ups from work. If I was going to destroy him, it had to be in front of the people whose opinions mattered most to him. I wasn't shy about inviting Jessica's family either. Her parents had always been supportive of us, and I knew this would hit them hard. But they had a right to know what their precious daughter had been up to. I made sure everyone who had any connection to our lives was there. No one would escape witnessing what was about to go down. In the days leading up to the event, I rehearsed my speech over and over again. I wanted it to be perfect. It couldn't just be a rant. No, it had to be calm, composed, like I was just stating facts. Facts that no one could refute. I had the photos, the videos, the texts, all of it printed, organized, and ready to be shown on the big screen. I even hired a tech guy to make sure everything would run smoothly when the time came. The night of the event, the air was thick with excitement. People were laughing, drinking, talking about work and family like it was just another gathering. Jessica was there, playing the role of the perfect wife, smiling and chatting with everyone as if nothing was wrong. And Rob? He was working the room like a pro, shaking hands, laughing, completely oblivious to the fact that his life was about to come crashing down. I watched them both from the other side of the room, keeping my distance, letting them enjoy their last moments of normalcy. It was almost amusing, in a sick way, seeing how confident they were, how sure they were that they'd gotten away with it. They had no idea what was coming. When the time felt right, I stepped up to the front of the room. The lights dimmed, and everyone's attention shifted toward me. I tapped the microphone, clearing my throat, and began. I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight. I started, my voice steady. It means a lot to have all of you, friends, family, colleagues, gathered together. I've been thinking a lot about what friendship means, about what trust means, about how important it is to know that the people you care about are there for you, through thick and thin. I saw Jessica glance at me, a faint look of confusion crossing her face. Rob, standing near the back, looked nervous. Good. And that's why tonight, I continued, I want to share something with all of you. Something personal. Something that's been weighing on me for quite some time. I motioned to the tech guy in the back, and the screen behind me lit up. The first image appeared, Jessica and Rob holding hands outside a restaurant. There was a collective gasp from the crowd, and Jessica's face went white. Rob's smile dropped faster than I'd ever seen. This, I said, pointing to the screen, is my wife, and my best friend, caught in the act sneaking around behind my back. I didn't stop there. The photos kept coming, one after another, more images of them together, laughing, kissing, disappearing into hotels. Then the texts, screenshots of their conversations, filled with flirting, plans to meet up, and even jokes about how clueless I was. The room was dead silent, except for the sounds of people whispering, the shock rippling through the crowd. Jessica tried to speak, stumbling over her words. It's not what it looks like, she stammered, but her voice was weak. No one was buying it. Rob didn't even bother defending himself. He just stood there, frozen, as the reality of the situation sank in. I could see his mind racing, trying to figure out how the hell he was going to explain this to his boss, his colleagues, his family. The silence didn't last long. People started murmuring, then shouting. Friends who had known us for years were furious, asking Jessica and Rob how they could do something like this. Some of them even turned to me, offering their support, but I didn't need it. This wasn't about sympathy. This was about justice. Jessica's parents, sitting in the front row, looked like they'd been hit by a truck. Her mother had tears in her eyes, and her father was shaking his head in disbelief. I almost felt bad for them, almost. The crowd split into factions. Some people huddled around me, offering condolences and saying things like, "I can't believe they did this to you." Others were grilling Jessica and Rob, demanding answers. It was chaos. Jessica tried to approach me, her eyes wide with panic. "Please, let's talk about this." "It's not what you think," she begged, but I stepped back, shaking my head. There's nothing to talk about, Jessica. You made your choice, I said, my voice cold. Now you have to live with it. Rob, on the other hand, just stood there silent. He knew it was over. His career, his friendships, everything he'd built gone. The people from his work, the ones he'd been sucking up to all night, were whispering amongst themselves, already distancing themselves from him. His golden boy reputation had been shattered in an instant. I let them stew in it for a while, watching as the reality of what they'd done sank in. Jessica was crying by the end, trying to explain herself to anyone who would listen, but no one wanted to hear it. Rob had slunk off to a corner, probably trying to figure out how he was going to salvage what was left of his life. As the night wound down, people started leaving, shaking their heads in disbelief. Some of them told me I'd done the right thing, that they were proud of me for standing up for myself. I didn't feel proud, though, just empty. But at least it was over. The scandal spread like wildfire. Within days, everyone knew about the affair. Jessica and Rob's names were on everyone's lips. At work, Rob's bosses found out about the affair, thanks to my well-timed email, and his promotion was swiftly revoked. I heard rumors that they were considering letting him go entirely, not wanting the bad press attached to the company. As for Jessica, well, let's just say she lost more than just her reputation. The fallout had only just begun. Life after the scandal? It was like watching a wildfire tear through everything, leaving nothing but ashes in its wake. Jessica and Rob, they lost everything. And I can't say they didn't deserve it. Let's start with Rob. He was always so sure of himself, always so damn proud of that career he'd built. But it didn't take long for the truth to catch up with him. After that night, word spread fast. His bosses got wind of the affair, and the company couldn't afford the bad press. The promotion he'd been bragging about for months? Gone. His job? Gone. Last I heard, they let him go quietly, not wanting the drama to go public, but the damage was done. His spotless reputation? Shattered. People at work didn't trust him anymore, and no one wanted to be associated with a man who'd cheated on his wife with his best friend's spouse. And his family? That perfect little family he liked to show off? It fell apart too. His wife found out everything, not just about the affair with Jessica, but about all the lies he'd been telling her for years. She took the kids, packed up, and left him. I heard through the grapevine that she's already filed for divorce. Rob's life? Completely ruined, all because he couldn't keep his hands off my wife. And Jessica, well, she didn't fare much better. Her family, who had always thought she was some kind of saint, turned their backs on her. Her parents were devastated, embarrassed by her actions. Friends we'd had for years? They wanted nothing to do with her. She became a pariah, the woman who'd cheated on her husband with his best friend. And me? I cut her off completely. She tried to call, to text, even showed up at my door once, crying, begging for forgiveness. But I didn't give her the time of day. She made her choice, and now she had to live with it. There was a part of me that felt satisfied, watching them both fall apart. I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy seeing the consequences of their betrayal. But that satisfaction didn't last long, because after the dust settled, I was still left with a mess of my own life. Starting over wasn't easy. The betrayal cut deep, and for a while, it was hard to trust anyone. I kept to myself, avoiding most of the people I used to hang out with. I didn't want to be around anyone who reminded me of what had happened. But eventually, I realized I couldn't live like that forever. So, I started rebuilding. Slowly, carefully, I expanded my social circle, meeting new people who didn't know the whole story, who didn't see me as the guy who got betrayed. It took time, but I began to trust again, cautiously, but it happened. And as much as I didn't want to admit it, the pain started to fade. It never disappeared entirely, but I found ways to live with it. I focused on myself for the first time in years, picking up hobbies I'd abandoned, traveling, meeting new people. There were still moments when it hurt, when I'd think back to the life I thought I had, to the trust one thought existed between Jessica and me, between Rob and me. But every time that pain crept back in, I reminded myself of how far I'd come. I wasn't the man who had been betrayed anymore. I was the man who had survived it. Looking back, the whole thing changed me. It made me realize just how fragile trust can be, how easily people you love can tear you apart without a second thought. But it also taught me something important, something I wish I'd known earlier. You can't control what other people do. You can't make someone love you. Can't make them stay loyal, no matter how much you give. The only thing you can control is how you react when everything falls apart. For a long time, I blamed myself. I thought maybe I wasn't good enough, that maybe I should have seen the signs sooner or done something differently. But that's bullshit. Their betrayal wasn't about me. It was about them, their choices, their selfishness, their inability to be honest. And once I understood that, I was able to let go of the guilt, the anger, the pain. I guess, if there's anything I've learned from all this, it's that you have to value yourself. You have to know your worth and never let anyone make you feel like you're less than you are. Because at the end of the day, the only person who's always going to have your back is you. And that's enough. So, here I am living my life on my terms. I'm not looking for a new relationship right now, and maybe I never will. But I'm okay with that. I've learned to be content with who I am, without needing someone else to complete me. And that, to me, is the greatest revenge of all.